My name is Mo Amir, and this is VANCOLOUR, British Columbia's bona fide culture and politics TV talk show right here on Check and Check Plus. We're also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Tonight, let's talk about the role of your city governments when it comes to the country's favorite hot topic, housing. Are municipalities like the City of Vancouver to blame for the province's housing unaffordability? Conservative Party of Canada leadership candidate Pierre Poilievre certainly thinks so, and our featured guest tonight is here to respond, a PhD from the London School of Economics and a former Canadian Member of Parliament. He is the 40th and current mayor of Vancouver. He's up for re-election this year in the City of Vancouver, now leading the electoral organization Forward Together. He is Kennedy Stewart. Mayor Stewart, so nice to see you.
Nice to be back.
So I'm on Twitter.
Yep.
And I see a viral video, and it is Conservative Party of Canada leadership candidate, presumed frontrunner, Pierre Poilievre. And he really singles out Vancouver City Hall, which includes you, council, and staff. And he calls you guys the big city gatekeepers. And he says, and I want to get this quote right, that as the big city gatekeeper, you are destroying the home ownership dreams of working class youth. And he attributes this to slow building permitting processes and other governmental costs. When you saw that, and I know you saw that because you're getting a lot of inquiries to respond, what's your response?
Well, my first thought was Skippy. Because Pierre Poilievre, I was in Parliament with the Stephen Harper government. I was with Jack Layton, and Pierre was with Harper. And he was the attack dog for Harper, and his nickname in the House of Commons was Skippy, because I don't know why it stuck, but it stuck. And so every time he would get up to speak, everybody would say, Skippy. So that's kind of, and I don't want to, make light of the situation, because I know it's serious for people in terms of housing, but I think you have to look at the messenger here. And a career politician, I think, elected at 25 in the deepest days of the Harper cuts and muzzling scientists and all that kind of stuff. I mean, so I think you really have to be careful in terms of listening to what he says. I know the report that he was quoting, it was poorly done. But I do think that I do agree with him that people are under serious stress when it comes to housing.
Absolutely.
But in terms of the blame game, I think the feds have a lot to account for, as does the province. But it is a topic that we're all gripped with and need to work on together to fix.
Right, but it's not just Pierre Poilievre. I mean, BC Attorney General David Eby, the leader of the BC Liberals, Kevin Falcon, have all made these indications that maybe it's time for senior levels of government to intervene, effectively taking away powers from municipal governments and speeding up or fast tracking housing permitting or housing development. So when you hear that from, very different parties, how does that make you feel in terms of, should senior levels of government really step up, or is this an intrusion of municipal powers?
Yeah, I mean, for me, let's just look at some facts here. So in 2010, when we hosted the Olympics in Vancouver, we had 4,200 units of housing under construction. Last year, after our count, we have now over 9,000. Okay. So we've doubled the amount of housing, not approved, but being built. Last year, we also approved about 10,000 new units. So that 9,000 a year number is going to increase up to 11, 12, 13,000 units. And that's what I mean is, like, a lot of this discussion is not fact-based. It's based on who can they point the finger at. I would agree with some of these, folks that are saying this is like the senior government should get involved. They've underinvested in housing for decades, and now they turn around and say, oh, wow, we have a housing problem. They should get back in with funding. Local governments are there for a reason. It is to make sure that what we do locally reflects the will of the public. And there's so much minutia. I've been in a public hearing last night for 4 hours. The same building we were debating 2 hours before. 68 speakers from the public. Right. The province and feds don't want to do that. That's us.
No,
right?
I don't
That's
think
our job. But if we have a vacancy rate of 1.1% and we're still building record levels of housing, or record levels of rental housing, there's a long way to go. And, that's why I'm seeking a second term, because I've got a lot more to do.
Yeah. So it sounds like you want more carrot than stick from senior levels of government.
And I don't know what kind of sticks they have. I know Mr. Poilievre said he was going to force us to approve more housing, but that's just a lie. There's nothing they can do at the federal level other than provide funding. They can't change our building codes. They can't come in and all of a sudden whip away our public hearings or our approval processes.
Right. So they can't institute something that says, any development proposal needs to be cleared in 3 months. They can't.
Federally, they can't.
Okay.
Provincially, I think that would be problematic if they tried to do it, because what makes Vancouver so great, I think, is the thought that's put into the city. In 2010, 75% of the housing being built was condos, and most of it luxury condos.
Right.
Now it's almost 60% rental. So in the short time I've been in office, we've managed to swing that. And how we did it was talking with developers, going to them and saying, hey, you're building a condo tower here. Why don't you make it rental instead?
Yeah.
You can look at inefficient public hearings one evening when you're sitting there and saying, wow, that took a long time to approve a 6-story building.
Right.
But then you actually look at what we're producing and you say, oh, that's impressive.
I have to ask, as a former colleague of Mr. Poilievre, did you guys have a relationship? Do you have a relationship now?
Yeah,
because it's possible that you might be mayor and he might be prime minister, and you'll have to work together, right?
Yeah, I mean, before Justin Trudeau was prime minister, we sat on the third bench in opposition and knew each other. Pierre Poilievre is actually quite a funny, charming guy. So we would, talk in the elevators and the hallways. And when I was elected in 2018, I said, I will use my knowledge of Ottawa, 7 years there to get stuff done. And I've secured $1 billion in housing, social housing money from using those connections. Whatever side of the house you're sitting on, I will talk to you. So that has been, I think, something I've really used to our advantage.
Right. Now, what if someone comes to you and says, Mayor Stewart, I like you, you're a good guy, but here's the thing. Vancouver is the third least affordable city in the world. Home ownership costs have gone up. The price of renting and the cost of renting has gone up. I want to believe that you're doing all the right things, but I'm just not seeing it yet.
Yeah.
What's your elevator pitch to them to say that you are doing the right things?
Yeah, and I think it's really a concern. But how long this is going on shows the depth of the problem. So let's take this in kind of economic terms. Let's think about supply and demand. So if we look at the demand side of housing, is what the worry is all kinds of people who don't need housing are buying it up and speculating on it. And so that drives up prices. So we have brought in so many demand side measures. One, for example, is empty homes tax that I increased to 3%. And it just today publicly announced I'm going to try to get council to increase it to 5 and double the number of audits, because you spend all this time approving condo buildings. Say you have developers take maybe 4 years to build them. You put them out in the market and then somebody buys out a floor and leaves it empty. Right. And so that defeats the purpose. So the empty homes tax has been very effective. I think we've put almost over 5,000 units back on the market. So that's demand side. But on the supply side, it's all about building.
Right.
And what are you building? I often say, like, Vancouver, since really 2010, it was all icing and no cake, right? Like we were building condo after condo. I mean, I rent a condo downtown. It's worth $2 million. I need to put like $400,000 down to buy it. That's icing. Like that is, it's a rental property that we're living in. But what we haven't built is kind of workforce housing. And so that is what I've been focusing on, not only a market rental, secured market rental, which there's thousands and thousands of units coming online, but also some of this housing that's available below market. So, for example, we have this moderate income housing rental pilot program. We've approved, MRPs.
Yeah.
We've approved 12 of those buildings. 20% of the units in these buildings are basically built for people making minimum wage, working full time, but they're secured for the life of the building at that level. So you're making minimum wage, you live in a studio apartment, you move on to do something else. The next person that moves in gets the same rent you had.
Right.
And so that revolutionary, lots of mayors call up and say, whoa, what are you guys doing over there? Because it's not on city land. It's all built by private money.
Right.
All the builders need is a little more density, a little more height, and they can make this work. And I think this has been a great success.
So it sounds like you're saying it's coming. Like we're doing the right things, but it's
and I think the depth of the problem shows how far we have to go. Like, okay, the Prime Minister recently challenged all cities to double the number of units they're building. Well, we've already done that in Vancouver, and we still aren't getting the results. And so it shows you how tough this is, not just in Vancouver, but everywhere in Canada now.
Absolutely. Well, I can appreciate that. Sit tight. I have many more questions for you. Folks, stick around, because after some business, the Mayor of Vancouver, Kennedy Stewart, will still be here. And in the wake of senior levels of government downloading many responsibilities to city governments in this province, the Mayor will give his view on what exactly municipalities in BC are responsible for. I'm Mo Amir. This is VANCOLOUR. Welcome back to This is VANCOLOUR. My name is Mo Amir, and we've been chatting with our featured guest tonight, the Mayor of Vancouver. He is Kennedy Stewart. Mayor Stewart, thanks for sticking around. You're taking up the whole show.
Oh, well.
I love it.
Thanks for having me.
I feel like the way to frame most of the municipal elections in BC this year will be around what is the scope of municipal governments, because there seems to be this dichotomy where some people, including a lot of talking heads in the media, are saying, you know what, we just want city governments to pick up the garbage and fix the potholes and mow the grass, stick to basic services. Yeah. And then on the other side, there are people, and including politicians, saying, you know, there are a lot of things that senior levels of government used to be responsible for that are now downloaded onto municipalities. Yep. Reportedly, the city of Vancouver spent $219 million in 2021 on things that were provincial or federal responsibilities. So give me your take. How do you justify the city of Vancouver spending that much money on things that apparently are outside of the scope of what the city should be doing?
Yeah, it is a conundrum for most mayors. I'm in this group. Michael Bloomberg invited me to it. It's with 40 U.S. mayors and some Canadian mayors. And we just really, these are the kind of things we talk about. So if there's a need in your community and the senior governments who are responsible for it don't do it, what do you do? Do you not address it and let it fester and get worse? Or do you jump in and try to create solutions and then really drag the senior governments in later?
Right.
And that's really been my approach. And it's easy to say, and my opponents say this all the time, only fund core services. Well, what does that mean? Then, for example, I don't go out and try to get the World Cup. You know, like, I mean, is that really what citizens of Vancouver want? They want a mayor that goes out and measures potholes, which is important. Like, you have to fix those things. But do you, you have one person dying a day here of overdoses, which is obviously a health concern. But do you stand by and let people drop dead and not do anything? I think that if those are the debates that you're having, then you shouldn't be mayor. Like, you got to do the best you can on every issue, whether you have the authority or not. But you also have to do it in a fiscally prudent way, and that's the tough balance.
So you think it's a very simple argument that some people are saying when they say just stick to the basics?
And disingenuous, because obviously these are people who have never worked in civic government, because they don't really, like, if you look at the budgets and the structures and stuff, that just, no cities do that anymore.
Yeah.
So, for example, we're a sister city relationship with Ukraine, and so I've been on Zoom calls with the mayor of Ukraine, of Odessa, while they're being shelled for the first time, and we're talking about, well, how do we bring refugees from his city to our city?
Oh, wow.
And so, do I not do that?
Right.
You know, and I think those, like, there is the theory. There are folks that like to be armchair mayors. Everybody likes to do it, but when you're in the job and you get these calls, you take them and do the best you can.
Let's talk about the drug poisoning crisis for a second. Yeah. I've been very outspoken about this. There's so many great people doing great work on the front lines. I know last time we talked, you talked about how you're willing to go to the wall on this file. I talked to Christine Boyle about this file as well, and I'm just curious. I mean, this was one of your key pillars when you ran in 2018. Have you exhausted sort of everything you can do as a mayor of a major city? I mean, we are talking about 7 people dying a day in BC, as you said, about 1 a day in the city of Vancouver. You talked about lobbying senior levels of government for safe supply and decriminalization. Is there anything else you can really do on this file?
You know, we do a lot on this. And in fact, this is the offloading that you're talking about. So, for example, we fund programs where we have folks that live in our SROs to go around and check on their neighbors to make sure they're okay, to often revive them when they've overdosed, to be kind of, the eyes of the SROs. We fund programs where folks who who are coming out of addiction or mental health crises actually get employed to do stuff, lower, jobs that are not high barrier jobs, and so they can kind of get back on their feet. And those are the kind of things we can directly fund, as well as much housing as we can get. But the services that are provided, the healthcare services, that's what has to come from the province. The decriminalization and safe supply, that's what has to come from the federal government. And we have to push to get them to move. I talked to the Prime Minister about this 2 weeks ago. I continue to talk to his various health ministers, is that you can't run away from this. You've got to stand up and take leadership and say, people who die of overdoses are just as valuable as anybody else, but that this crisis has been basically ignored is a travesty, and now spreading across the country.
Absolutely, yeah. Really quickly, I'm hearing that one of your opponents is going to float this idea that you can take city land in the city of Vancouver and work with different organizations, perhaps senior levels of government, to create addiction treatment centers. Is that something you've looked at, or is that something that's even realistic that the city can do?
Yeah, I mean, so we have no control over their health services, right? That Vancouver Coastal Health is the organization that we work with all the time, we partner with all the time, but those initiatives have to be led by the people that supply the doctors and nurses.
Sure.
So we could say, here's a building we have, and we don't know how to build it because we're not healthcare providers.
Right.
And then, boy, it would be great if all these doctors and nurses came in. So that has to be led by the health authority, and they're doing it. We've opened a brand new safe supply center on Hastings Street. Dr. Christy Sutherland and her colleagues have opened this with a women's health care clinic in the back. 58 West Hastings we're partnering with. So but where we can help is with safe space. So the overdose prevention site in Yaletown that many of my colleagues voted against and campaigned against. Ken Sim actively campaigned not to have that happen. We can provide lower lease costs for those types of facilities, which we did. But that is why the partnerships are crucial, because this is not a one government solution.
Right. Well, Mayor Stewart, I'm not finished with you just yet. We have a quick commercial break, and we'll get back to it. Folks, stick around, because after a commercial break, we will ask, is Vancouver an unsafe city? And I'm sure the mayor of Vancouver, Kennedy Stewart, has some thoughts about that. I'm Mo Amir. This is VANCOLOUR. Welcome back to This is VANCOLOUR. My name is Mo Amir. Thanks for tuning in as we've been discussing some municipal issues with the mayor of British Columbia's largest city, the city of Vancouver. He is, of course, Mayor Kennedy Stewart. Mayor Stewart, thanks so much for your time tonight.
Happy to be here.
So I have to ask, I'm seeing this narrative really being perpetuated by some of your political opponents, by some op-eds in the media, that Vancouver is an unsafe city. You're the top dog, you're overseeing the whole city. So tell me, is Vancouver unsafe, or is it getting increasingly unsafe? Because both would be concerning, obviously.
Yeah, and it's part of what we've been talking about already. There's been a lot of offloading by provincial and federal government. So, for example, a lot of street disorder, if you want to call that, is basically related to drugs, the overdose crisis, the kind of inability of people to get the proper housing. And so in the end, when the senior governments kind of get away from that, it lands on us. And more importantly, it lands on our really only 24/7 services in the city, which are police and fire. It doesn't make anybody feel better on the ground to explain that's what's happening,
right?
But that is what's happening. So when you have, 100,000 injecting drug users in the province, and you really don't provide much care for them, they're going to land on the streets and be in very difficult shape. When you have, thousands of folks with mental health challenges who you don't provide services to, they're going to land on the streets, and you're going to have, folks are going to run into each other, and you're going to have a conflict, which you see happening.
So is Vancouver getting increasingly unsafe? Yeah,
I would say, that everybody should feel safe in the city. And I know some people do and some people don't. But the key here is public safety means different things to different people.
Right.
So, if you're being assaulted, of course, or you're, you have your car broke into, I think that's traditional policing kind of activity. And our police are great. The VPD have a very high solve rate. They're very well funded. We fund them $1 million a day to do this work. But if you're somebody that's experiencing hate, if you're experiencing, anti-Black racism anti-Asian hate, you also need to feel safe. And so we need to broaden the conversation from crime to public safety and say the city needs a larger approach to this to make sure everybody feels safe.
Right. Now, I have to ask you, you did strike a deal with BC Attorney General David Eby regarding tent cities, effectively ending tent cities, because you were able to find places for people to go as alternatives. Victoria had a very similar deal. However, I'm seeing a tent city in Crab Park.
Right.
So what happened?
Yeah, so the Park Board has sole jurisdiction over parks as defined by our charter. So even if the city, say, for example, wanted to get an injunction in a park, we can't do it. That's the Park Board's legal jurisdiction. The province provides housing. And so what the city does is support both these organizations. And that's what our MOU says. So when we see a new encampment growing, essentially the housing minister, BC Housing, has to say there's enough housing for everybody. The Park Board then gets an injunction and moves people gently out into housing. And then we support through our homeless outreach teams or whatever other support we can give. And that's worked very well in, say, in Strathcona. There's an enormous amount of housing we had to secure, which we did. But in Crab Park, we're watching that situation very carefully. There was an injunction that was applied for, but it was rejected by a judge. So now we're back to the drawing board in a way, looking at, well, what else can we do? We did have enough housing, but the courts have rejected injunctions.
Oh, interesting.
So we are now working. We've had lots of meetings about what we can do next to make sure those people get homes.
Mayor Stewart, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being on the show. You were one of the original guests on the podcast, so it's nice to have you back.
Nice to be back.
Folks, that was the mayor of Vancouver, Kennedy Stewart, elected as an independent. He is now running for re-election with the electoral organization Forward Together in this year's municipal election in Vancouver. Of course, municipal elections are happening all across the province on October 15th. Wherever you live, start looking into what's happening in your community because municipal governance directly affects your day-to-day life. That's our show for this week. Of course, we will be back next week right here on Check. In the meantime, find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and the Check Plus app for more. This is VANCOLOUR, and I'm Mo Amir, telling you that in a province where you can be anything, be colorful. Peace.